I still sleep with a knife under my pillow. Not the same knife, that one rusted years ago, buried in a backyard I no longer own. But a knife, always a knife, because some lessons don't leave your body when you leave the house where you learned them. They stay in your fingers, in your breath, in the way you wake at 3 a.m. convinced someone is standing in the corner. No one is standing in the corner, not anymore. I own the corners now. I own the house. I own the basement where I learned to be silent, to be small, to be merchandise priced by the night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You don't know me yet. You don't know about the turbine. You don't know that my parents didn't just die, they were killed. And the woman who killed them called it love, called it duty, called me the poor orphan while she spent their blood money on her own comfort. My name is Naomi. I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how my aunt murdered my parents for their inheritance, sold me to pay her debts, and how I bought her house at auction and turned her basement into a door instead of a cage. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, this is where we tell the truth about families that wear mourning clothes while they count the insurance money. If you've ever had someone call themselves your guardian while they treated you like inventory, if you've ever been told to be grateful while you were being sold subscribe, we have stories for you every week, and we read every comment. Here's my story. I was 7 when they died. Old enough to remember my mother's laugh, loud, unapologetic, the kind of laugh that made strangers smile. Old enough to remember my father's hands, always grease-stained from the garage he owned, always gentle when they braided my hair or fixed my bike. Old enough to remember the morning they left for vacation, the way my mother knelt to my level and said, "We'll bring you back a shell, baby, a big one, you can hear the ocean." They never came back. Flight 447, Miami to Caracas. The left engine failed 12 minutes after takeoff. The plane went down in the Atlantic, 218 people, no survivors. I learned the details later from newspapers my aunt hid, from whispers she didn't know I could hear, from the internet when I was old enough to search. Mechanical failure. Faulty turbine blade. Unfortunate accident. No one to blame. My Aunt Ruth made sure I learned the official story. She repeated it at the funeral, at the custody hearing, at every family gathering where someone asked about the tragedy. "A terrible accident," she'd say, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that was always ready, always pristine. Poor Naomi. Orphan so young, but she's with family now, I'll take care of her. She took care of me all right. The way you take care of a car you don't plan to keep, basic maintenance. Minimal investment, maximum extraction. Ruth was my father's older sister. They hadn't spoken in 5 years before the crash, some argument about money, about inheritance, about Ruth's lifestyle that my father disapproved of. She appeared at the funeral like she'd been waiting for the invitation. She cried perfectly. She had documents ready, power of attorney, custody petitions, insurance claims. She was organized, she was prepared. She was, in retrospect, rehearsed. I went to live with her in a house I'd never seen, in a town I'd never visited, in a basement that smelled of mildew and old paint. The main floor was hers, cream carpets, floral furniture, porcelain figurines that watched me with painted eyes. The basement was mine. A mattress on a frame. Her bulb? A window too small to climb through, too high to reach without a chair. "You'll be comfortable here," Ruth said, showing me the space. "Children need boundaries, structure." My own daughter, she paused, touched her throat, produced a tear that seemed to come on command. My own daughter would have loved a room like this, so cozy, so safe. Her daughter had died at 4. Meningitis. Sudden, tragic, the kind of loss that made Ruth a figure of sympathy in the community. Used that sympathy for years. Fundraisers, charity events, the grieving mother who'd turned her pain into purpose. What people didn't know, what I learned later, was that the daughter's death had been investigated, twice. Questions about delayed medical care, about Ruth's insistence on home remedies before calling 911, about the life insurance policy that paid out double for accidental death. The investigations went nowhere. Ruth was a widow, her husband, a veteran, had died in a hunting accident when the daughter was 2. She was respected. She was pitied. She was above suspicion. I was 7. I didn't know any of this. I only knew that the woman who called herself my aunt looked at me like I was a bill she had to pay. Not angry, not loving, just transactional, the way you look at a utility statement. The state paid her. Foster care payments, survivor benefits, my parents' social security. She collected everything, deposited it, and spent it on things that had nothing to do with me. New furniture, a cruise, a kitchen renovation while I ate canned soup in the basement. I wore clothes from thrift stores while she bought designer handbags. I walked to school while she leased a new car every 2 years. I didn't complain. I was grateful, that's what she taught me. Other children have nothing, she'd say, watching me eat my soup. You have a roof, you have food, you have family, be grateful. Naomi, gratitude is the only currency that matters. I was grateful. I was also hungry, lonely, and terrified. But gratitude covered those feelings like a blanket that doesn't warm you, present, visible, functionally useless. The selling started when I was 13, not directly, not obviously. Ruth worked as a receptionist at a medical clinic, but her real income came from arrangements. She knew people, people who needed things, people who paid cash for discretion. Mr. Castellanos owned a restaurant in town, an upscale place, dark wood and soft lighting, where the mayor ate and the city council met. He was also connected, not obviously, not in ways the police investigated, but in ways that made people nervous. Made people pay, made people look away. Ruth brought me there one night. Mr. Castellanos needs help, she said, driving me in her new car. Cleaning. Organizing. He's been kind to us. You'll work hard, you'll be grateful. I worked. I cleaned tables until 1 a.m. while the restaurant emptied. Mr. Castellanos watched. He didn't touch me, not then, he just watched, asked questions. How old are you, Naomi? Do you like school? Do you have a boyfriend? Ruth stood by the door, counting money he gave her, smiling that smile that didn't reach her eyes. $200, that was the price. For my labor, she said, for the opportunity, for my gratitude. It happened every week, then twice a week, then 3 times. I cleaned, I organized. I stayed late while Mr. Castellanos watched, while he asked more questions, while he moved closer, while his hand accidentally brushed mine as I reached for plate. I was 15 when I found the notebook. Ruth's left on the kitchen table, open to a page with columns, dates, amounts, names. Next to my name, N. Restaurant $200/night. Next to other names, J. Garage $150. M. Delivery $300. A ledger, an inventory, children as line items. I was merchandise, I was revenue. I was the poor orphan who should be grateful for the opportunity to be sold. I ran that night. Not far, I had nowhere to go. To a park, to a bench, to the cold that felt safer than the basement. I came back in the morning because I was 15, because I had no money, because the world doesn't believe runaway foster girls who accuse respected widows of trafficking. Ruth didn't punish me. She didn't need to. She just looked at me, that transactional look, and said, "Where would you go, Naomi? Who would believe you? I'm all you have, be grateful." I was grateful. I was also planning. At 16, I found the knife. A kitchen knife, serrated, sharp enough to cut rope. I kept it under my mattress. I practiced gripping it in the dark. I made a plan. If Mr. Castellanos ever touched me, if he ever followed me to the basement, if he ever closed the door behind him, I would use it. I would rather be a murderer than merchandise. I would rather die than be sold again. He never touched me, not directly. He was careful, was Mr. Castellanos. He just watched, just asked, just stood too close. But the knife was my insurance. My power. The only thing in that basement that was truly mine. I left at 17, walked out with a backpack, the knife, and $300 I'd stolen from Ruth's emergency cash. She didn't report me missing. I was 17, nearly adult, nearly useless. She let me go the way you let go of a lease that's expiring. I lived in shelters. I lied about my age. I finished high school at night, working days at a garage that paid cash and asked no questions. The owner, a woman named Rosa, saw me watching her mechanics. "You want to learn?" she asked. I nodded. "Show up tomorrow at 6, don't be late." I wasn't late, not once in 3 years. I learned engines the way I'd learned survival, by watching, by doing, by failing and trying again. Rosa taught me everything. She also taught me that family wasn't blood. "Family is who shows up at 6 a.m., she said, handing me a wrench. "Who doesn't steal your tools? Who doesn't make you pay for existing?" I loved her. I never told her. I didn't know how. At 25, I opened my own garage. Small, rented, 1 lift and a toolbox. By 30, I had 3 employees, a reputation for honesty that bordered on brutal, and a savings account that Ruth would have envied. I didn't date. I didn't trust. I slept with a knife under my pillow in an apartment with 3 locks and a doorbell camera. I was safe. I was also alone. But alone was better than sold. The mechanic came in at 30, old, drunk, talking to himself. He wanted his brakes fixed, but he wanted to talk more about his life, about his career, about aviation maintenance, 30 years, retired, pension that didn't cover rent. "Flight 447, he said while I worked on his car. "You remember, fell in the Atlantic, turbine failure. I was there that day, maintenance crew." I didn't look up. I remember. Faulty blade, they said, manufacturing defect, but I saw something. He leaned close, bourbon on his breath, saw a woman, cleaning uniform, near the turbine, throwing something in, quick-like, before anyone noticed. I reported it. They said I was drinking, said I was confused, closed the investigation in 3 months. My hand stopped, the wrench hung in the air. What woman? Didn't know then, dark hair, average, nothing special, but I took a photo, habit. Always photographing my work area. For insurance, you know. He laughed, wet and sad. Found it last week, going through boxes. Thought someone should know, before I die, before it doesn't matter. He showed me the photo, faded, blurry, taken from distance. A woman in a cleaning uniform, hand raised, something dark disappearing into the turbine housing. Her face was partially turned, partially shadowed, but I knew the jawline, the posture, the way she held her shoulders when she thought no one was watching. Ruth. I didn't believe it immediately. I couldn't. The photo was old, blurry, possibly misinterpreted. The mechanic was drunk, possibly unreliable. But I took the photo. I paid for his brakes. I drove home and I searched. Flight 447, Miami to Caracas. August 14, 1996. The official report: catastrophic failure of left turbine due to foreign object damage. FOD likely introduced during pre-flight maintenance. No evidence of foul play. But the mechanic's name was in the report, listed as a witness. His statement: observed unauthorized personnel near turbine prior to departure. Dismissed. Witness had been disciplined for alcohol use. Statement considered unreliable. I dug deeper. The airline's maintenance logs, the personnel records, the security footage long since erased but referenced in documents, and Ruth's presence at the airport that day. She'd claimed in custody hearings that she drove her brother to the airport, said goodbye, watched them leave. But the passenger logs showed my parents arrived by taxi. Ruth wasn't listed as a visitor. No security record of her passing through the terminal, but there was a record. In the cargo area, a cleaning contractor, short-staffed, had hired temporary workers. One of them, R. Martinez, had signed in at 5:47 a.m., signed out at 6:15 a.m. The flight departed at 6:30 a.m. The turbine failed at 6:42 a.m. Ruth's maiden name was Martinez. She'd married Ruth Castellanos after her husband's death, kept the name for respectability. But in 1996, she was still Ruth Martinez. And she was at that airport, in that uniform. At that turbine, I found more: the insurance. My parents had $2.3 million in coverage. Life insurance, property investments. Ruth, as my guardian, controlled everything. She'd spent it over 20 years. The house purchased with a loan from the estate. The cruises, the cars, the renovations, all expenses for my care. The restaurant where I was sold, a business investment that failed, written off, no records of the actual cash flow. She'd killed them for money. She'd kept me for money. She'd sold me for money. And now, at 60, she was running out. The bankruptcy was public record. Ruth had leveraged the house, taken loans against it, invested in schemes that failed. Mr. Castellanos had died 5 years ago, heart attack, sudden, convenient. Without his connections, Ruth's arrangements dried up. Without the insurance money, her lifestyle collapsed. The house, my prison, my inventory warehouse, my gratitude classroom was going to auction. Public auction. Anyone with cash could buy it. I had cash, not enough for the full price but enough for a starting bid. And I had something else, the file I'd built over 15 years. The notebook I'd photographed at 15. The testimony of other foster children Ruth had cared for, 3 of them now adults, willing to speak. The mechanic's photo. The airport records, the pattern of deposits that matched the dates of my employment at the restaurant. Not enough for a court of law. The statute of limitations on most of it had expired. Ruth was old, possibly ill, possibly protected by the same sympathy that had shielded her for decades. But enough for a different kind of justice. Enough for the court of public opinion. Enough for the small town where reputation was currency, where Ruth had built her identity as grieving mother, charitable widow, savior of orphans. I attended the auction. I didn't hide. I wore my work clothes, oil-stained jeans, a t-shirt with my garage logo, boots that had walked through engines and shelters in 15 years of survival. My hair was short, practical. My arms showed tattoos, mechanical gears, Rosa's name in script, a date that meant nothing to anyone but me. Ruth was there, smaller than I remembered, thinner. The painted face cracking around the edges, the expensive clothes hanging loose. The hands that had counted my price now clutching a purse that was empty. She didn't recognize me at first. Why would she? The last time she'd seen me, I was 17, scared, running. Now I was 35, solid, visible. I looked like my mother, I'd been told. The loud laugh, the grease-stained hands, the way of moving through the world like I owned it. But when I raised my paddle, number 47, registered under my business name, she looked. And she saw, something in my jaw, my posture, my refusal to look away. Her face went pale, her hand went to her throat. She whispered something to the man beside her, a lawyer, cheap, as desperate as she was. The bidding started at $60,000. I let others bid first. A developer, a house flipper, a young couple looking for their dream home. Ruth watched them, hopeful, calculating whether any bid would cover her debts. I waited until $75,000. Then I raised my paddle. 76. Ruth's head snapped to me, really looked, and I saw the moment of recognition, the widening eyes, the gasp, the hand that reached for her chest like she was having the heart attack she'd avoided for decades. 77, the developer countered. 80, I said. 81, 85. Silence. The auctioneer looked around. 85,000 going once. Ruth stood. You can't, she couldn't finish. She couldn't say my name. She couldn't admit in public that she knew me, that she'd raised me, that she'd sold me. Going twice. 85,000 to number 47. I bought my prison. I bought my cage. I bought the basement where I'd learned to be silent, to be grateful, to keep a knife under my pillow. And I paid $87,000, exactly, calculated, estimated total of what Ruth had earned from my labor, my sale, my existence, adjusted for inflation, for interest, for the compound cost of being merchandise. I didn't move in immediately. I stood in the empty house, the cream carpets removed, the floral furniture gone to auction, the porcelain figurines sold in lots. The basement was bare. The mattress frame was rusted. The window was still too small, still too high. But the light switch worked. I could turn it on. I could turn it off. I could stand in the dark and know that I chose to be there, that I could leave, that the door was unlocked and the key was in my pocket. I renovated slowly, not to erase, to transform. The main floor became classrooms. The kitchen became a communal space. The bedrooms became dormitories. And the basement, my basement, became an office. A place with real light, with a desk, with a lock that I controlled from the inside. I named it the basement. Not clever, not poetic, just true. A place for people who'd been kept below, who'd learned to be silent, who needed to discover that basements could be foundations instead of prisons. The first resident was a girl named Jasmine. 17, foster system, no family, no plan. She wanted to learn mechanics, I taught her. The second was Marcus. 16, gay, thrown out by parents who called it love. He wanted to learn welding. Rosa taught him, my Rosa. Retired now, but still showing up at 6 a.m. They came, more of them. Kids the system failed, kids who'd been sold in ways like and unlike mine, kids who needed a place where no one collected money for their presence. I paid for everything, food, utilities, teachers, materials. The money I'd saved, the money I'd earned, the money Ruth had spent on cruises and cars and kitchen renovations. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. I visited Ruth once. In the state facility where she'd landed, no money, no family, no reputation. Alzheimer's, they'd said, early onset, aggressive. She didn't recognize most people, she didn't remember most things, but she recognized me. I sat across from her in a vinyl chair that smelled of disinfectant. She was smaller than at the auction. Frailer. The painted face was gone, replaced by skin that hung loose, by eyes that wandered. But when she saw me, they focused. They focused with a clarity that the nurses said was rare, that came and went like a signal through static. Naomi, she whispered. Not a question, I didn't respond. I opened my folder. The notebook pages, photographed at 15, the ledger. N, restaurant, $200/night. The airport photo. The mechanic's testimony, recorded, transcribed. The bank records. The pattern of deposits, $2.3 million spent over 20 years. My parents' blood converted into cream carpets and porcelain figurines. I placed them on the table between us. She looked at them, her hands trembled. She touched the photo herself, younger, in uniform, hand at the turbine, and her finger traced the image like she was trying to remember being that person. Do you remember? I asked. My voice was steady. I'd practiced this for 15 years. The turbine, the foreign object, the mechanical failure that wasn't mechanical. Do you remember what you threw in? She didn't answer. Her eyes were cloudy, confused, but her finger kept tracing. Her lips moved, silent. Do you remember selling me? The nights at the restaurant. Mr. Castellano's watching while I cleaned. The $200 you collected while I kept a knife under my pillow because I was more afraid of him than of dying. Still no answer. The nurses watched from the doorway, uncertain whether to intervene. I wasn't threatening. I wasn't shouting. I was just present, the way she'd been present, counting money while I was merchandise. I bought your house, I said. $87,000. The price of my childhood, calculated with interest. I turned it into a place where kids like me learn to be people, where no one pays for their presence, where the locks are on the inside and the light works and no one has to be grateful for being alive. Ruth looked up. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, a flicker, a ghost, I saw something. Not remorse, not exactly, recognition, the look of a woman who'd built a life on theft and discovered, too late, that the inventory had become the owner. I kept a knife, I said, standing. Under my pillow, every night. I was ready to use it. I was ready to die rather than be sold again. You taught me that, Ruth. You taught me that survival is not gratitude. Survival is a knife in the dark and the willingness to use it. I gathered my documents. I walked to the door. I didn't look back, but I heard her. A whisper, barely audible, possibly imagined. The ocean, she wanted a shell. I stopped, my mother's promise. The shell I'd never received. The ocean I'd never heard. I didn't turn around. I walked out. The door closed behind me, and I stood in the hallway of a facility that smelled of disinfectant and endings, and I let myself cry. Not for Ruth, not for forgiveness. For the 7-year-old who'd waited for a shell, who'd learned to be grateful for a basement, who'd kept a knife and never used it and survived anyway. I'm 35 now. The basement has been running for 3 years. We've taught 200 kids mechanics, welding, carpentry, coding. Skills that don't require gratitude. Skills that build instead of consume. I still sleep with a knife. I still wake at 3 a.m. I still check the corners before I turn out the light. These habits don't leave. They become part of you like scar tissue, like the calluses on my hands from years of gripping wrenches. But I also sleep with the door unlocked, with the light off, with the knowledge that if someone enters, it's because I invited them, because the basement is a place of invitation, not imprisonment. Jasmine is 20 now. She runs the mechanical program. Marcus is 19, certified welder, saving for his own shop. They live in the main floor, not the basement. They have windows they can open, doors they can lock or unlock, lives they choose. Sometimes a new kid asks why I live in the basement, why my office is below ground, why I chose the space that was my prison. I tell them, because some places don't get abandoned. They get reclaimed. Because I need to remember every night that the lock is on my side now. And because I pause always at this part, because someone has to show you that basements can be foundations. That below ground isn't the same as below worth. Ruth died last year. I didn't attend the funeral. There wasn't one, no money, no family, no one to organize it. The state cremated her, scattered her in a potter's field. I know because I checked. Not because I cared, because I needed to know the ending. Because stories without endings haunt you. I keep the photo in my office. The airport photo. Ruth at the turbine, young, purposeful, murderous. I don't show it to the kids. I don't need to. But I look at it sometimes when I'm tired, when I'm wondering if the work matters, if the money spent is worth the lives changed. And I remember, the woman in that photo thought she was winning. She thought she was smart, prepared, above consequence. She thought the poor orphan would stay grateful, stay silent, stay merchandise. She didn't know that merchandise learns, that gratitude can become calculation, that the knife under the pillow can become the key in the lock, the foundation under the house, the choice to turn a basement into a door. I'm Naomi. I'm 35 years old. I own a garage, a house, and a basement that is no longer a prison. I have no parents, no aunt, no family of blood. But I have Jasmine and Marcus and 200 kids who learned that their hands can build instead of serve. And I have a knife. Under my pillow. Not for fear anymore. For memory. For the 7-year-old who was ready to die rather than be sold, and who survived to become someone who buys houses and builds doors. See you in the next story.